Welcome to your 2024 Real Estate Rundown. I'm Chris Hallows with Benchmark Mortgage.
And I'm Renee with Realty Executives of Flagstaff.
So we are doing these quarterly now as we're keeping up with everything happening then over the last 3 months here in 2024. So we can really track the data and provide big insights to you. But one of the first things I wanted to talk about is, I think, at least in the industry, this is beating a dead horse for sure. I mean, it's I guess it's not dead yet. Lots of things happening with the NAR settlement lawsuit and DOJ ruling, and I guess people should, you maybe read a lot of different articles, but Renee, can you help us get some perspective on maybe what's happened? I know there's still things to come on this, but what has happened to this point, and what are potential implications?
Absolutely. So as many of you know, the National Association of Realtors did lose a lawsuit in 2023. It was an antitrust lawsuit. And when they lost, they originally came out and said that their plan was to appeal. That gave plenty of time for everybody to kind of figure out where this could potentially go. And then, unfortunately, a few things happened, and they decided that they needed to settle quicker than they originally had planned. With the settlement that they have presented at this point in time, the court still needs to approve this settlement. So as of right now, nothing is set in stone. Things can still change, things can still be tweaked, but moving forward with the information that we have, currently the industry is just preparing for two major bullet points from that settlement, which is there will no longer be offers of compensation through the MLS or any third-party site that gets fed from the MLS. And then number two, a buyer broker will be required by law.
Buyer broker. For those of us, and a lot of people didn't sign these things,
It's true.
What is a buyer broker?
So I've actually always used a buyer broker. It's an employment agreement. It says I'm here to work for you, and it does have a compensation stated in it. So typically I have an amount that I ask my clients to make sure that I am compensated as I work with them. And that has not always come from sellers. Sometimes buyers do have to jump in. This is something that we're now going to be looking at more often.
It's very interesting to break these things down. And I think, again, anyone can have an opinion on where this is going. There's obviously tons and tons of clickbait.
Yes.
And it's and from someone in the industry, I'll just tell you, a lot of obnoxious,
yes,
like ignorant kind of perspectives, right? And I think the hard part, and I was talking to, we all know terrible professionals,
absolutely,
right? And even in the, you almost think doctors, let's talk about doctors went to a decade worth of school. I know very well, I know so very close friends as physicians that will never go to another physician because of potential outcomes or something.
Yes.
And so, and knowing that, and so what I think is hard on this one is kind of the mob that's jumped on, because there are a lot of really bad realtors out there. Doesn't mean that there's not fantastic ones that have had fantastic outcomes, but for all those people that either are from ignorance or had a bad experience, there's been kind of a mob mentality on away with the agent and
realtors are dead.
we're gonna save so much money now, and now home prices and everything, and it's well, no, slow down, pump your brakes, right? It's a matter of did WebMD put doctors out of business, or did E-Trade put financial advisors out of business? And it's no, I think the two big things, now, not to jump on a complete rant with this, I love the transparency. That's what a true professional has to then embrace, is that, guess what? Realtors that are not good at what they do, or just want to sell a home here or there, are no longer going to be in the business, and that is better for everybody.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
And then on the opposite side of things is that it's an education aspect for our markets. You and I were sharing some anecdotes real quick, and I think this is valuable for us to kind of dive into. Again, full anecdotal evidence. There are all sorts of perspective here, but real life example on someone that's seen this news, listed their property in northern Arizona, and I'm talking to the buyer's agent because they're coming my way saying, hey, the seller, there's no compensation listed, which is great. It's fine. That means buyer's agent has to call and understand the terms of the agreement. What's your seller looking for? What's going on here? As good buyer's agents typically do. And that was actually one of the first things. Is like I heard someone talk about and say some agents were like, "You mean I have to call the list agent?" It's like, you weren't doing that anyways?
Communication is key, guys. We got this.
Yeah, that was one of the first things I said. Is like, hey, we need to be able to, don't work with agents that aren't calling. But yeah, so they called and this seller said, I'm not offering a compensation to a buyer's agent unless it's a first-time home buyer. My client was buying a primary home but was a move-up buyer, right? And so when they're all trying to figure out how do they do this, how they work this out, and they've worked together for a long time, this buyer and this agent. They've looked at and offered on multiple homes. And so when it was starting to get creative, at the end of the day, the buyer, and I would love that the buyer drove this.
Yeah.
Because we were missing each other back and forth on some messages. And when I finally got a hold of this buyer's agent, they said the buyer just said, present the offer with the compensation we've discussed from the buyer broker. Mm-hmm. And if they will pay that, we will move forward with the negotiations. If they want to counter us on price or other terms, we will address it. Mm-hmm. And if they say no to your compensation, we'll go look at another home.
Right.
And when asked, that buyer's agent asked that list agent and said, this is very interesting that your seller has chosen this strategy and this comment that you've been making very clear. How has the response been? This property was over 30 days on market, right? There's all sorts of different variables of price and attractiveness or condition, you could get into, but it basically said, okay, this property had been sitting on market, and the list agent said that over 25 to 30% of showings, they'd make the showing appointment, they would call, they would find out this information, and the showings were canceled.
And that's not by the realtor.
No, that's the buyer saying, I don't want to look at the home anymore.
Yeah, because there's other options, and they want representation. They deserve representation, and their representation deserves to be compensated.
Yeah. Yeah, and and so I think and then when you were saying a quick anecdote of for sale by owner, that, because we're in a little bit of a seller's market, and then how often do we see a for sale by owner go for under an appraised value?
Right.
So
for sale by owners can be tricky, and a lot of the times they just don't have all of the information that an agent would have, and they don't have their pulse on everything that's happening. Just in the last couple of weeks, being in this every single day in, day out, all the time, there's changes. There are moments that things are changing, and it's very, very quick. So long story short, apparently there was a for sale by owner here in town, put their home on the market, did not have representation. A buyer who did have representation brought a contract. They came to terms. The appraisal came in, and it came in $120,000 under their contract price.
Above?
Under their contract price.
Oh, the appraisal was...
I'm sorry. Above, yes. I'm thinking the seller's losing. So yes, it came in $120,000
the appraised value was above the contract
over
price.
Their contract price, which basically says that seller just lost out on at least $120,000.
Yeah.
And if they had representation, there's no way that they ever would have gone to the market that far under market value.
Yeah. And I think that's the idea. Is these are maybe some that could be a relatively extreme example, but I do kind of pose the question of without a big dog in the fight, because I think the market's going to do what the market's going to do, right? Mm-hmm. We don't need to convince anyone of what to consider to look at for this, other than think about the big picture, right? Statistically speaking, 32% of buyers are first-time home buyers.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And they're coming up typically, the down payment percentage on first-time home buyers is under 10%.
Right.
They don't have money to compensate representation, but they are maybe the most needed category of representation. Yeah. So there's a lot of philosophical questions in this, and like big market capitalist questions of like what's going to happen. Obviously, the free market will control, and I see this basically leading, like we've discussed, is right now 89% of buyers purchase their home through a real estate agent.
Right.
So that's showing that there is a value there. Again, I think a lot of agents that are not providing that high value will get out of the market. I see this maybe, people are going to sharpen pencils here and there, and we're going to have to figure out how to operate forward. But I hope that ultimately that kind of puts to rest some of the big concerns on, like, yes, there will be some significant differences, but in a lot of ways, it's just going to be a broader conversation on, how do we best negotiate for best terms in all.
I agree. Parties. I think number one, do your research on your representation and who you're going to be working with. Because if that's going to be looped in, there's going to be more steps. There's going to be negotiation skills that have to be had to be able to get you into the home that you're looking to get into. So I don't think things will change drastically, but I think we'll be able to pivot and it'll work.
Yep. So, and in the age old, I love this one. Don't trip over don't trip over dollars to save pennies.
There
right?
you go.
Be careful, right? So what we were listening to is if you are getting sued, right? You have liability on the line.
Right.
Would you go and say, I can save some money by representing myself, right? If you are buying a 6 to 7 figure property here in Northern Arizona with all the liability and potential mishaps or again, you think of the extremes because that's what, if it's all plain Jane, but not all of them are plain Jane, but you think of extremes. Do you want to pick the cheapest services and you be the decider of that, right? Or be very aware of I want to pick the best because I'm going to pay the best, so let's find the best.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Instead of just your husband's brother, sister's uncle who just got their license.
And it's a hobby.
Exactly.
They do it on the side.
All right. Let's talk into market opportunity. So it's been, we're seeing things pick up here in the spring, but it's been pretty paced. So can you give us some stats here? Well, what's the temperature of then the winter to spring market?
So it's been really interesting, honestly. We were very slow over the winter. And in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we're really starting to see things pick up. So right now, we're still heavily in a seller's market. We have 2.37 absorption rate, which basically means we have 2.37 months of inventory. That has grown from last year, so that's an improvement. But we are starting, we hit 60 degrees this week, so we're starting to see buyers come to the market, which is very typical for Flagstaff. It's a seasonal market here. When it's cold, sellers aren't typically selling as much, and when it's cold, buyers aren't buying as much. And so basically what that means is if you're in that realm, get your feet on the ground now because things are really, really going to be picking up on both ends. We're still sitting at a pretty high median sales price, so we're still hovering around that 600 range. There was a lot of expectation that was going to come down. It did not. It's not going to come down. If anything, it's going to get higher, quicker. And, there's some local experts here in town who really feel that this could be the cheapest that Flagstaff ever is again, with interest rates hopefully potentially coming down. We just don't see it changing much.
Yeah. So outside of the stats, obviously that's showing a pretty tight market, right? Still very fairly lean to the seller.
Very much
I know
so.
in the wintertime we were seeing, as is typical for wintertime, I think we have to lean into that we usually speaking see seasonality in our markets.
100%.
Just think about all the reasons that you don't want to go home shopping in the wintertime, right? You got the holidays, you got the temperatures, you got snow on the roofs, you got kids in school and different things happening, right? And so we typically see more sales in the summertime. We moved through a freight train style of 2020 through 2022, right? Yeah. So that seasonality didn't exist.
Right.
I was kind of reminding my team all right, these are kind of normal things, right? As we pick up here in the summertime. And so I think it's very important, so we saw that seasonality kind of return to market. So again, not saying that, okay, things are going down, but things were slower. We saw some more negotiation room. We had some clients getting concessions here and there and having some pace to market. But I do think it's important to note is because that is the majority reason, again, not bigger trends of market slowing or coming down, but because of the seasonality. And then typically we see things now speeding up, right? We're seeing that again, right?
Yeah.
I had 2 out of 3 buyers lose out on offers last weekend. And so it's don't think that this is just your pot shot market for low balls, right?
I think sometimes it takes a couple steps. Sometimes it takes writing a couple contracts for buyers to really get a feel for what's happening. And I'm definitely seeing that right now. We will do everything possible to get an offer accepted, and we'll work together to make sure that those terms are making sense. But sometimes you kind of have to feel what other buyers are willing to do. So every time my buyer doesn't get a contract accepted, I will always call the listing agent and say, can you give me the details? As many details as they're willing to share so that I can bring that back to my client and educate them on what another buyer was willing to do. And I've had to do that a lot lately. Things are going really, really fast. Townhomes, in the mid 600s, coming in $20,000-$30,000 over list price.
Wow.
So yeah, it's picking up really quick.
Yeah. So, and again, case by case, right? And I think that's the
Yeah.
big thing to note is that certain opportunities, there might be some wiggle room still, especially if you're, and that's, again, comes down to professional expertise on knowing like, hey, do you really love this home? And you're so connected with that buyer that it's like, hey, we want to be first blood on this, right? We want to strike fast and get that attention of the seller and get this going, because if we let the true gem of this shine for another week or two on market, and I've seen that happen, which is so frustrating because like, hey, this has been on market for 2 or 3 weeks.
And then
said the same thing like 5 other people that then are all of a sudden bidding on each other. And you're like,
yeah, it's spot on. I mean, honestly,
hard,
that is happening a lot right now because we're right on that cusp of when things were slow and cold and people were distracted by other things. It's that time of year and we're right on that cusp. It's warming up in Phoenix. It's warming up here. Kids are getting ready to get out of school. Jobs are changing. People need to move. I mean, it's right now. And so, yeah, calling and having an agent say we just accepted an offer, it's happened to me 3 times since Monday.
Yeah, so be careful there.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about rates here and the economy and Fed and inflation. And I want to call this, and I'm going to keep this as simple as I can. And everyone knows me relatively, knows I'm an optimist. And so I'm going to frame this as this is the buyer's superpower, right? And so your superpower right now is that we're not seeing anything change anytime really fast. And what that's a superpower in the sense of, inflation. We just had some numbers come out in this here. This is getting posted here. The second week of April, and which I can't believe I'm saying that already. But inflation's running hot still, and that's kind of freaked out the markets. Rates are going to be, I generally say, they're going to stay higher for longer than most of us would have liked, right? And it's just the nature of the stubborn inflation, right? And so that being said, that means that a lot of folks that are counting themselves out and saying, I'm waiting for those lower rates, I'm waiting for better affordability, are kind of lying to themselves on that being a better opportunity.
Right.
And they're going to count themselves out of the market. Whereas if you can be bold and if you can afford the market as it stands, we can get creative with terms of, we won't go into all of it today, but we've talked about before, like the buy downs and concessions and where they exist still in a competitive, in more increasingly competitive market, that you will likely be better off than when those rates come down. Because where will those prices be? Is that then you're extending yourself out? Are we now 8, 12, 24 months out before we see meaningful difference? I'll share a chart here on the board, which then is showing an aggregate kind of mentality from from Fannie Mortgage Bankers Association, National Association of Realtors, is maybe we'll see upwards of a 1 to 1.25% reduction on then where rates currently are. This chart, please note, is a little dated in the sense of this was in March. Rates are actually a little higher than they were in March. So that's the thing, is like, if you just wait and then you're saying, okay, I'm going to buy in the summertime, late summer, we'll see when it's better. Rates could be the same or higher. So finding the right house in the low inventory market that we're in is your number one priority right now. You might be dealing with less people given these rates. So, that's my optimism right now, is there's a lot of opportunity in the current market, and take advantage of the fact that we're not seeing a lot of change.
I 100% agree. If the numbers work, if it makes sense, if you can do it now, there's going to come a time when you may regret not being able to move quicker or at the pace that you need.
Yep.
So.
And anyone listening to us, again, it's alternative, right? You always have to think of the alternative, and when it's right for you, it's right for you. But little exercise for anyone out there: if you are renting, is take your monthly rent, times that by 12, and see all that money going out to someone else, right? So rates are expensive, but you at least own that home,
right?
And you at least are paying some principal. And Renee can run some calculations on appreciation. And I think let's put this other chart up. I think this is important too. Let's throw this one up here on the board of that over the next, I think this is 4 to 5 years, that will show on this chart, is by average appreciation, which is kind of what we're expecting now, right? We're not seeing this market go down. Your opportunity costs is around $74,000 of equity gained in the next 5 years on a $400,000 purchase, which we know they're a little more expensive, but you're going to make a little bit more in Flagstaff. So opportunity cost is significant, and we're happy to help you out. So any other closing thoughts, Renee?
I think everything is moving forward though. I think everything is good. Get ready for the summer, get ready for an awesome season of real estate, and call with any questions because there's a lot of information that we're throwing at you, especially with the DOJ and interest rates and all the options. I think just reach out if anybody needs anything.
Awesome. Like, share, subscribe. We'll catch you next quarter.